On the line with us is Allan Lichtman. He is the author of a new book, The Case for Impeachment. He's also the distinguished professor of history at American University. Allan Lichtman, Lichtman, is his Twitter handle. And Allan, welcome back to Professor Lichtman, welcome to the program. And thank you for writing this book. Can you, first of all, before we actually get into what's in your book, I'm wondering, this book came out before the Mueller Report did. Is there anything that you would add to it now, given what you know from what you've learned from Robert Mueller's investigation?
The book actually came out even before Robert Mueller was appointed as independent special counsel. Mm-hmm. Sure, there are some things I would add based on what I now know a long time before the book came out. Even the revised paperback edition came out long before the Mueller report. But I have to say this, that while the Mueller report adds detail and verisimilitude to the story, basically it is not much different than what I laid out in my book, where I had a chapter on the Russia connection, talked about the Trump Tower meeting, have a chapter on Trump flouting the law throughout his life and career, someone who had no concern whatsoever for the law or rules. I have a chapter on Trump lies. Of course, at that time, when I published the book, certain details were not yet known, and certain actions had not yet taken place, or at least were not known to me, such as Trump's efforts to fire the special counsel through the White House counsel McGahn's refusal, Trump's then telling him to lie. And in particular, of course, I didn't know anything yet about the hush money payments to the porn star and the Playboy model, and certainly nothing yet about the fact that Trump had, in criminal violation of the campaign finance laws, directed Michael Cohen to make the payments and then tried to keep them secret and not report them on his Federal Election Commission reports. That's not a technical violation. The campaign finance laws are designed precisely to avoid the corruption of our democracy, and that's what Trump was doing. But I have to say, the basics of how Donald Trump operates, his connections with the Russians, his disregard for the law, his disregard for the truth, are all in my book. I did write a column which came out yesterday in The Hill, though, on 21 questions that I think the House Judiciary Committee ought to ask Robert Mueller when he comes before them. Because, yes, you can plow through his report and pull things out, but, 1 out of 500 Americans are going to do so. I think It's very important that the committee extract from Mueller in clear and concise ways how Donald Trump has abused power, colluded with the Russians, and obstructed justice, even if the special counsel could not conclude on a technical basis that he should be charged beyond a reasonable doubt with crime.
I love the quote on the back of your book. It's from Alexander Hamilton, the Federalist, and I believe it's Federalist 56. Impeachment will proceed from the misconduct of public men, or, in other words, from the abuse or violation of some public trust, and they relate chiefly to injuries done immediately to the society itself. That's a very different working definition of impeachment than what I think we have been dealing with recently in all these, everybody's slicing and dicing all the technicalities of who committed what and how and why, and is it an impeachable offense, et cetera, et cetera. Can you speak to that as a professor in the Department of History at American University?
Yes.
There is a context here.
There is a deep context here. First of all, let me say that the framers did not regard impeachment as a catastrophic event. Quite the contrary. The framers were shrewd, practical politicians. They know that all men were corruptible, all men needed to be checked. And so they put impeachment into the Constitution as a legal, orderly, and peaceful means for dealing with a rogue president or other officials such as judges. And they expected that impeachment would be employed. And it was an alternative to the way in which rogue leaders were dealt with in their own time in the 18th century by assassination or revolution. And they very decidedly did not put impeachment into the hands of the judiciary, where it would have been a technical legal matter. Rather, they put impeachment into a political body. The sole authority to impeach is in the hands of the House of Representatives. If they impeach, you then have a trial presided over by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and then the Senate votes on removal, and it takes 2/3. But impeachment only takes a simple majority. And the framers were very clear that impeachment was not equivalent to a criminal violation on the statute books. Statute books change all the time. Campaign finance law violations, for example, didn't even exist at the time of the framing of the Constitution, well over 100 years later before any of those laws were put into effect. But they were very clear that impeachment, as Alexander Hamilton pointed out, was designed to check a president who was abusing his power, undermining our democracy, undermining our national security. There's a tremendous confusion about that. The second thing that people are confused about, Tom, is the difference between impeachment and an impeachment inquiry, and that's been muddled together in the current debate. What I've been advocating is not a rush to impeachment at all, but rather the beginning of an impeachment inquiry. That's just the first step. Yeah. It's not equivalent to impeachment. Now, but it is essential.
Go ahead.
Because you cannot focus the attention of the American people on scattered investigations in 6 different committees. It's just going to confuse everyone. And Donald Trump is a master at confusion and deflection. There is no substitute for the formality and focus of an impeachment investigation and the public hearings that would be part of it the way they were during Watergate.
Now, there's 2 things with regard to an impeachment hearing, beginning the process. And I think that Hillary Clinton, in her op-ed in the Washington Post yesterday, pointed out there was a big difference between the way this was handled in '74 with Nixon, where the Senate went through a whole series of investigations to the point that they had laid out all the criminality of Richard Nixon that got public opinion in favor of impeachment above 50%. Before they referred that, before the House referred it to the Senate for actual impeachment, well, actually before Nixon resigned, compared to 1998, when as soon as the Ken Starr report came out in all its lurid pornographic detail, the House immediately voted to impeach. And that might have been because they didn't want to have, long drawn-out debates about it, because the guy leading that debate, Newt Gingrich, was, going back to his office and getting it on with his mistress, Callista. The guy who was, another guy who was managing the floor, Bob Livingston, was having an affair. Another one who was managing the floor, impeachment, Bob Barr of Georgia, was having an affair. I mean, as I recall, all but one of the people who were leading the impeachment process in the House of Representatives were actively having extramarital relations while they were doing that. But in any case, number one, during an impeachment inquiry, the House acquires some of the powers of the Article III branch of the judiciary in terms of its ability to compel testimony and subpoena things that they might not otherwise have. And number two, that the Constitution says that the pardon power of the president, which could be theoretically used, like Trump apparently did, according to Mueller, in the case of Paul Manafort, to say, just, hang in there, don't rat me out, and I will take care of you by the end of my presidency, that impeachment power is suspended during an impeachment process. Are those 2 observations accurate? And if so, how so? To what extent do they play a role in all this? And we've got about a minute and a half here, I think, until we hit a hard break.
Sure. I'm not sure that the president's impeachment power would be suspended. That hasn't been tested. But it is absolutely clear that the president cannot pardon himself during an impeachment inquiry or doing a trial. Impeachment is independent of the president's pardon power, and that is crystal clear. And while the House normally has subpoena power, the president, of course, as we've now seen, has no respect for the separation of powers or for the oversight responsibilities of the Congress, and has been stonewalling and resisting, and that could go on for a very long time. But I do believe if you had an impeachment inquiry going on, any resistance by the president would be met with a much more hostile response on the part of the judiciary. And let me close this segment by saying, during Watergate, as you say, you had the Senate investigation, you had the special prosecutor investigation, and you had an impeachment investigation. So a special prosecutor or independent counsel investigation is not a substitute for an impeachment investigation. They're doing very different things.
Right. And very, very quickly, we got 40 seconds now. To what extent? Well, actually, never mind. I think you've already answered the question. You know, to what extent do you expect this thing to play out in the near future?
Well, you know, I think the Democrats really have a moment of truth here. I think if they refuse even to have an impeachment investigation, they will have become, in a sense, the worse enablers of Donald Trump than even the Republicans, because they have no political reason not to do it. And they will have then empowered Trump, as he has been throughout his life, to do whatever damage he wants without a fear of consequence.